Snow has a strange way of muting everything. It softens footsteps, swallows angry words, and leaves only the memories that matter. The morning my mother threw my duffel bag into the snow, she didn't scream. Her voice was almost tired. Get out and live on the streets, your sister needs the room. Soldiers sleep in ditches. I looked at the old olive green bag lying in the driveway. It held nearly everything I owned that wasn't already in military storage. I wanted to explain that soldiers also signed contracts, honored commitments, and sometimes carried responsibilities their own families never saw. Instead, I picked up the duffel, brushed off the snow, and quietly said, "I hope things work out for both of you." Then I drove away. 3 hours later, I reached the installation where my new orders instructed me to report. The reception building wasn't impressive. Clean floors, bright lights, people moving with practiced efficiency. It felt familiar, and after the morning I'd had, familiarity was comforting. A young private greeted me with a professional smile. "Morning, ma'am." "Please." I handed him my common access card. He scanned it, nothing happened. He frowned and scanned it again, the screen changed. The confidence in his face disappeared almost instantly. He looked at me, then back at the monitor, then lowered his voice. "Ma'am, only the commander can unlock this tier." For a second, I thought the system had malfunctioned. "It does that sometimes," I said gently. "No rush." He nodded but reached for the phone with surprising urgency. Within minutes, the atmosphere around the desk subtly shifted. No alarms sounded. No one panicked. People simply became quieter. Military professionals know the difference between drama and procedure. 10 minutes later, a colonel walked through the front doors, not hurried, not irritated, simply focused. He extended his hand. "Welcome. We've been expecting you." The private immediately apologized for the delay. Before the colonel could respond, I smiled at the young soldier. "You followed the process exactly as you were trained. That's what matters." His shoulders relaxed. I remembered being new once. People often imagine the military is built on fearless people. It isn't. It's built on ordinary people trying to make the right decision under pressure. The colonel escorted me through several secured doors. He never mentioned the unusual access level. Instead, he asked, "How was your trip?" I hesitated. "My housing situation changed unexpectedly this morning." He didn't ask for details, he simply nodded. "We'll make sure you have somewhere comfortable until everything settles." That was leadership. Not demanding explanations, not making assumptions, just solving the problem in front of him. Growing up, my family never understood my career. To them, I worked for the army. That was the beginning and end of it. Whenever holidays were missed, birthdays forgotten, or family gatherings skipped, my mother assumed I cared more about work than people. The truth was simpler. Some assignments required silence, not because they were glamorous, because trust sometimes depends on saying less. Over the years, I'd learned not to defend myself. If someone couldn't understand without classified details, there wasn't much I could add. Silence can be frustrating. But sometimes it's part of keeping faith with people who depend on you. The temporary quarters surprised even me. They weren't luxurious. They were simply reserved for personnel, whose travel required additional privacy and flexibility. Nothing about them suggested status. Everything about them suggested responsibility. A week later, the commander stopped by during orientation. He thanked several of us for accepting demanding assignments that required long hours and little public recognition. He never discussed specifics, neither did we. Confidentiality wasn't a burden anymore. It was simply part of the profession. Months passed. One afternoon, the commander asked if I'd mind allowing a general appreciation letter to be sent to my emergency contact. "It won't include operational details," he explained. "Only recognition of your service." I agreed. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was my younger sister. Her voice sounded unusually quiet. "Mom got the letter." I waited. "I don't think we understood what you actually do." Neither had most people. Not because it was mysterious, because many meaningful jobs look ordinary from the outside. A month later, Families were invited to an installation recognition ceremony. My mother came. She looked uncomfortable, almost unsure whether she belonged there. During his remarks, the commander spoke about something that has stayed with me ever since. There are people whose greatest accomplishments will never appear in newspapers, resumes, or social media posts. They serve with professionalism, accept responsibility quietly, and understand that recognition is never the purpose of the work. He wasn't talking only about me. He was talking about hundreds of people whose names would never become public. When the ceremony ended, my mother stood beside me for a long moment before speaking. I thought silence meant you had nothing important to say. I smiled. Sometimes silence means you're protecting something more important than yourself. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. Years of misunderstanding don't disappear in a single afternoon. But something changed. For the first time, she stopped measuring my life by what she could see. On the drive home, I thought back to that snowy morning. The duffel bag hadn't changed, neither had I. Only perception had. People often believe they know someone's worth because they've seen their paycheck, their apartment, their job title, or the size of the room they sleep in. But character rarely announces itself. Responsibility is often invisible, and the strongest people I've ever met have never needed to explain why they mattered. The young private who scanned my CAC that day taught me something too. He didn't panic. He didn't pretend to know more than he did. He followed procedure, asked for help, and treated everyone with respect. That is professionalism. The commander reminded me that leadership isn't measured by how loudly someone gives orders. It's measured by how quietly they remove obstacles for others. And my mother reminded me of something harder. Sometimes the people closest to us see only the chapter they're standing in, not the story we've been living all along. The snow melted weeks later. The words she spoke that morning eventually did too. But the lesson remained. Never assume you know the weight someone carries simply because their bag looks light. Sometimes the greatest responsibilities leave the fewest visible marks.